Console, online. HPG connection, online. Educational module, online. All systems, nominal.
Hello, class, and welcome to episode 16 of On the Origin of Battlemechs Podcast. I am your host, Brent Stewart McKee, and my co-host today is...
I'm Joshua.
And today we're going to talk about the Gladiator, a little-known mech, but a important part of the history, especially for the Draconis Combine.
And for those out there who may be wondering, no, this is not the 95-ton Clan Gladiator.
That's correct. Sorry for burying the lead on that, people. This is a 55-ton mech produced by the Draconis Combine and doesn't have a lot of variety in its weapons loadout, so definitely not an Omni-mech.
No, also about 5.5 centuries ahead of time.
So this guy is interesting because he definitely looks a little different than all the rest we've seen so far. While most of the mechs we've talked about in the past, especially recently with the Griffin, the Wasp, the Shadowhawk, the Commando, they're all pretty much just a bipedal humanoid form, exactly what you would expect. And this guy doesn't completely break from that tradition, still has that bipedal form with the hands, and it looks like a human proportioned body, but the head is actually shoved down onto the front of the torso and has a almost caterpillar sort of assembly mounting up towards where the head would normally be.
Yeah, it's kind of ridged, almost like you'd see in a sci-fi worm or something from Arrakis.
Almost like dragon scales.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, so it's definitely worth noting that. It's not a huge break in designs, but it's noteworthy.
Yeah, another noteworthy thing about the Gladiator is, if I'm not mistaken, it's the first homegrown Draconis Combine mech.
That is correct.
Which we've seen the Lyran Commonwealth, obviously the Terran Hegemony, and Davian, but we haven't seen Free Worlds League or Draconis Combine until now, with the Combine starting out with a 55-ton mech.
And of course, also honorable mention to the Capellans. They will be the last one to cross the finish line because they were the last one to get their hands on the tech readouts or specifications on how to make battle mechs.
Capellans, the last and the least.
So this guy has the design quirks of having a cowl and having a bad reputation, which you can very clearly see the cowl, and we'll discuss why it has that bad reputation in the rest of this episode. So, with the success of the raid on Coventry in 2461 by Death Team 2, coordinated and organized by a loyal opposition ISF agent, the Draconis Combine now had access to Battlemech technology and could start building their own program. Coordinator Kozo von Roers established Samarkand Armor Works, the predecessor to Luthien Armor Works, to produce their first battle mech for the Draconis Combine, the Gladiator. And they start off with the 1R.
Yeah, and it took them 7 years of the best and brightest with the full backing of the coordinator to develop the Gladiator. And Coordinator von Roers was in such a hurry to get a battle mech into production that he basically put the very first model, the very first design into production, despite the fact that the design team hadn't worked out the inevitable design flaws and obstacles that a first generation anything will have.
Yeah, the 1R suffered from a bunch of issues. Most notably were the ones where balance, as in it would just fall over, and the other ones being an OS instability resulting in the mech shutting down and taking a couple minutes to restart randomly.
I mean, this mech literally has the blue screen of death going on.
Yeah, that's not what you want to see happening on the middle of a battlefield.
Like I said, despite that, they kept producing it and pushing it out to frontline units, and a lot of propaganda about how these were minor technical difficulties, and a lot of refit and upgrade and field repair type kits were going out to frontline units to try and fix these issues. However, supply issues and lack of these kits would be the Second Sword of Light's excuse when they failed in their objectives to take the planet Nox in 2475. Bit of a face-saving lie.
Yeah, because it is noted in the historical records that they did receive their upgrade kits several months beforehand.
But that failure, whether or not those upgrade kits were received and applied, and whether or not those upgrade kits did the job was kind of the final nail in the coffin for the Gladiator.
At least the 1R.
Yeah.
Because after that, it resulted in the production halting in 2488. The reason cited for it end of production was the lack of armor and firepower when standing up to the Terran's counterpart. But, it had already fallen out of favor, so, like you said, the final nail in the coffin.
Yeah, and I mean, that wasn't just the 1R. This New Samarkand Armor Works had put out the 2R, which was briefly accepted and then turned down in favor of another mech we'll talk about later, the Von Rohrs. So yeah, I mean, it was a bad design rushed into service. It took its final blow to its reputation with the failure to capture the planet Nox, and over time they just said, you know what, we have newer, better designs. We're just going to phase this piece of junk out.
Mm-hmm. So for armaments, it's got a large laser in the right arm and 2 medium lasers in the left arm. It's got a movement profile of 4/6, and it's got 14 heat sinks. So not great on heat management, and when you also look at the design quirks for the prototype, it's got a bad reputation, poor sealing, poor workmanship, it's unbalanced, and it's obsolete by 2488, and it has a double listing of also having a cowl. So with all of that into account, it's got a battle value of 1027 and a point value of 27, and it's clearly a first design.
Yeah, and definitely rushed into service. It is interesting to note that even though its 14 heat sinks aren't a lot by some later standards, it is enough for this Gladiator 1R to sink all of its weapon heat and only generate movement heat.
Mm-hmm. So now we've already touched on the upgrade, but we haven't mentioned it. It's the 2R, and it showed up in 2487, the short-lived non-primitive upgrade of the 1R that was shelved when the Combine adopted the Von Rohrs as the Combine's standard battle mech. And this guy doesn't change the weapons loadout, but it has a standard engine now, resulting in a movement profile of 5.8. They also upgrade the heat sinks to 19, which allows much better heat management.
19 heat sinks? I mean, that thing is really oversynced. You're generating 16
with your run. And there's a little bit more armor on there too. So all in all, just a straight overall upgrade across the board. Nothing to write home about.
Yeah, it's just a non-primitive version, which takes advantage of the weight savings to bump up the speed and armor. And then that one has a battle value of 1,184, point value of 31. And we get 2 more kind of, I'm assuming they were desperate attempts by New Samarkand to be like, look, we can fix the problems, just let us make this Gladiator.
They actually weren't. So the 3R, which came out in 2439, which was previously erroneously listed in 2486 due to loss of records that have since been recovered, the 3R was produced by Merryweather Industries after they secured the blueprints for the Gladiator by unknown means. They nearly bankrupted the company, resolving the design issues, refining the design, and retooling their factories. So this is made by a different company entirely.
Okay. And when did you say that happened?
According to the records I have, it is 2490.
Okay.
So 3 years afterwards, but it was previously listed as 2468.
Okay. Yeah, so it's interesting because the Merryweather Industries is actually not in the Draconis Combine. It's a Terran hegemony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that would probably be part of the got the blueprints by unknown means.
Yeah, and I just find it interesting because they're also not part of the hegemony's normal mech production. So it almost seems like a kind of backdoor deal probably went down with New Samarkand. Hey, we've got this design. Our people hate it. They won't make it, but we need to make some money off of it, so we'll sell it to you under the table.
Yeah, stranger things have happened.
It'd be an interesting short story to read about how the Gladiator made its way to the Terran hegemony.
You know, I honestly feel like the Battletech universe is deep and rich enough that we can have novels that aren't just all about mech combat, but, just corporate espionage, because that's still fun and interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's one reason why I love this universe is the intrigue and spy games and all of that stuff going on.
So, back to the battlefield, it's got a LRM-10 in the right torso, an LRM-10 in the left torso, a medium laser in the right arm, and a medium laser in the left arm, a movement profile of 585, and 12 single heat sinks, so it can handle that heat relatively well. But the addition of jump jets, I really think, kicks it up a notch.
Yeah, it definitely wants to be a fire support mech, with those 2 LRM-10s and 2 medium lasers,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very interesting change from the designs they must have gotten, which it was a PPC and 2 medium lasers.
Yeah. I also imagine there might be some weapon scarcity issues or problems with production, because LRMs are probably a lot easier to manufacture than a PPC from scratch.
Yeah, that would make sense.
So this guy's battle value is 1282 and a point value of 33. And it was followed up by the 4R in 2495, also by Merryweather. And this unit never finished its production quota. After a decade, Merryweather retooled to an industrial mech manufacturer and was eventually wiped out during the Succession Wars. This guy's got a PPC in the right arm, a SRM-6 in the right arm, and 2 medium lasers in the left arm. Still keeps that movement profile of 585. This model has 13 heat sinks. So really kind of switching up to a bracket fire, got that PPC for long range, and then you're going to close for the SRMs and the 2 medium lasers.
This feels like half of a Warhammer.
Yeah, that's not wrong.
A little bit faster, a little bit more mobile with the jump jets, fair bit lighter, but 1 PPC, an SRM-6, and 2 medium lasers versus 2 PPCs, 2 medium lasers, an SRM-6, and 2 machine guns. Either that or this is a upgraded Panther.
Yeah.
I mean, this 4R kind of a bad Griffin in a way. Griffin says, I've got a PPC and an LRM. I want to snipe from range.
Yeah. The Gladiator says, I have a PPC and SRMs and medium lasers. I want to...
I could be at long range if you want me at long range. I could be at short range if you want me at short range.
Just put me in, coach. Just put me in.
Yeah. Put me in so my company doesn't die.
Yeah. It's got a battle value of 1291 and a point value of 31.
It's a bad Griffin. Sums it up for me.
Fair enough. Well, after that, we get to a 1R retrofit from Major Alex Keller in 3071, and he spent a considerable fortune rebuilding his Gladiator from the ground up, so much so that almost nothing of the original specs remains. It's got a whole laundry list of stuff, so let's start from the top and work down.
Keller's Gladiator has a light fusion engine, XL gyro, same movement profile as the original 1R, so 4.6, with that modern light fusion engine, freed up enough tonnage to add improved jump jets, giving it a jump profile of 6, an experimental supercharger to bump the run speed up to 8, a snub-nose PPC with a prototype PPC capacitor, 2 ER medium lasers, an MML5, and then an improved C3.
So this has all the bells and whistles.
And what's fascinating is, for all the kind of crap we've talked about the Gladiator, how it's just kind of meh, and it's got all those issues with poor workmanship and instability and blue screen of death. Apparently a Gladiator of one of the 1 through 4 series was good enough to be handed down generation after generation for, 300 years?
It was not handed down. Only so much that I know it's not his family mech. Because, to take a little excerpt from the pilot profiles later in the episode, he actually was kidnapped as a young child for a couple years, and then when he was returned to his family, his mom had died, and his dad was a workaholic and decided he had no time for kids, so he put him in an orphanage.
Wow.
Yeah. Father of the Year material right there.
It's been around for 500 years, 570 years.
Your point stands. Someone looked at this and saw enough potential to rebuild it from the ground up into what we're seeing in front of us now, and what we're seeing is actually something interesting. This is something that we want to talk about.
Yeah, and I'm not just saying someone, I think it was Keller who probably rebuilt it, given his pilot profile, which we'll talk about later, but I meant more the original baseline Gladiator. I'm going to guess it's a 4R rather than a 1R.
Record sheet says 1R.
Well, I know we've seen record sheets be wrong, but
that's true. I'm just saying.
Either way, it's someone kept it around, kept it in service, kept it alive. Probably had a couple different minor variations over the years to replace failing equipment, but they kept it alive for over 500 years, almost 600 years until Keller could get his hands on it. That means, this, and the reason I think it's probably a 4R is it was the final iteration, so the most successful, most likely to have survived. But they kept it alive for almost 600 years to where Keller could get his hands on it and then upgrade it. That means the Gladiator must do something at least a little bit right.
Enough people saw value in it.
Yeah.
So Keller rebuilt this one, and he has some ties to the Star Corps. And he went, I made this. And then Star Corps looked at it and went, you made this. And then turned around and went, I made this.
Yep.
Because they came out with the 5R in 3075.
Yeah, so Keller's has a battle value of 1553, point value of 36. And yeah, Star Corps took a look at the footage of Keller's ground up rebuild of the Gladiator and said, hey, you got a lot of expensive experimental tech in there, but if you strip that out, we think you got something we could make and market. And I kind of like this 5R. It loses the supercharger and it loses the capacitor, which, quick sidebar on that capacitor. Well, you cover capacitor real quick. Give the people an idea of what a capacitor does in real life.
All right, so a capacitor in the real world, it's an electronic component where you have two plates, one that has a stored charge on it, and then when the voltage in the system decreases below that stored charge, that charge migrates back into the system to even out the voltage flow. So a capacitor basically stores up energy, if you want to boil it down to a basic sense. Now, a PPC capacitor...
PPC capacitor takes that concept of storing energy and weaponizes it. So a PPC capacitor, you can charge it up. It generates an extra 5 points of heat every turn, and then it maintains that extra 5 points of heat until you discharge it. But when you fire your PPC, you discharge the PPC capacitor as well, and it adds 5 points of damage to your PPC's baseline damage. So your standard PPC with a PPC capacitor will do 15 points of damage instead of 10 points of damage.
But it'll also generate 15 heat.
Yes, which gets you up to where a clan ER-PPC is, which is 15 heat, 15 damage. Or a heavy PPC is 15 heat, 15 damage. Where it gets crazy is when you put it on a heavy PPC, which does 15 points of damage base for 15 points of heat. Now you can do 20 points of damage for 20 points of heat.
So it just dials that PPC up.
Yep. So you already got that marvelous 9 hex minimum range snub nose PPC, and you're bumping it from 10 heat, 10 damage at 9 hexes to 15 heat, 15 damage at 9 hexes of short range.
Now, how long does the PPC capacitor take to charge, or is it instantaneous?
I believe it takes 1 turn to charge.
And you still generate the 5 heat during that turn?
Yes.
Okay.
I only know this because I have no life and I've read most of the rules. I've never actually used them in combat though, so no firsthand experience.
I have read the rules, but that was a ways back, and I've never played with them on Megamech or the battlefield, so it's always good to have a refresher.
Yeah, the 5R, which is Star Corps' production model, strips out the supercharger, strips out the capacitor, strips out the C3I, because all of that is experimental, hard to produce, very expensive technology, at least for when this came out in 3075. And they replaced the C3I with a standard C3 slave, upgraded the MML5 with Artemis 4, added a Guardian ECM, and made this a pretty solid mech, in my opinion.
They also added 2 double heat sinks as well,
Which probably makes it better, because it's got that heat management.
No, this is not as flashy as Keller's model, but this is still very, very nice.
I would drive this. It's a little slow for a 55-ton medium mech,
Mm-hmm.
but I love my snub-nosed PPCs. I love my MMLs, and jumping 5 or more is always really nice. I would prefer it with a jump of 7, just because it's a medium mech. That extra point of TMM would really help it.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think that light fusion engine is pretty survivable. XL gyro hurts a little bit, but and you have a pretty good idea of what this 5R wants to do, because it's got that C3 slave, that snub nose, and MML5. This is where it kind of hurts a little bit, because it wants to stay at that 9 hex short range for survivability reasons, but it wants to get in closer to give targeting data to the rest of its lands.
Yeah.
So that hurts it a little bit, but overall, you've got a Guardian ECM too to disrupt or protect the network. So,
well, it's got a battle value of 1425 and a point value of 34. And definitely, I think the pick of all of the gladiators, this is the one I would pilot.
yeah.
So, our next segment is pilot profiles, and we have one pilot, Major Alex Keller, and he is a man with connections to the Star Corps and interstellar expeditions, and eventually connections to Chandrasekhar Kurita. He commands the Devil's Brigade, a mercenaries unit, and he cemented his historical importance with the discovery of the New Dallas Memory Core. He is described as being sarcastic, obsessive about upgrading his mech, and not liking the word of Blake. As such, he is described as an eccentric glory hound. Honestly, he sounds like my kind of guy. That sarcastic and upgrade your stuff, like that's
Yep.
my people.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that him and his brigade are on most watch lists. Like, why is anybody but Word of Blake putting him on the watch list? Unless it's, hey, these guys might find something that we're interested in.
Yeah. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but really the Star Corps and interstellar expeditions, they're not so much about mapping in the current timeline so much as rediscovering lost things. So
yeah, that's a lot of what Interstellar Expeditions does is look for lost tech caches and historical things post jihad, because Interstellar Expeditions has actually been around for a very long time, but post jihad they also spend a lot of time looking for the Word of Blake's hidden worlds,
any remnants of them?
remnants or possibly functional ones, because not all of them have been found and confirmed to be dead. So that's probably what Uncle Chandy had them doing, is searching out Word of Blake bases, because that's kind of what he was up to at that point in time.
I mean, that sounds like a good goal for all the successor states.
Yeah, one thing I do want to comment on the artwork. This Gladiator reminds me of some sort of big rig transformer. Like, this is the Optimus Prime of the Battletech universe, because it's got two big exhaust stacks sticking out the back.
I mean, it's had those on most of the designs. I think the Primitive had them kind of like blacked out almost, the way the actuators are around the midriff and hips, you know?
Yeah, I'm not saying it's specific to this design, this 5R.
Oh, just in general.
Yeah, just in general, this is Optimus Prime, big rig transformer with those two exhaust stacks sticking up off the back.
I can see that. So, our history bite for this episode is going to be the New Dallas Memory Core. And the New Dallas Memory Core came, obviously, from New Dallas. And in the days of the Terran hegemony, the Terran government made sure that New Dallas was supplied with the most up-to-date technology, especially military tech. The militia also constructed massive boneyards. Eagle-eyed listeners will hear my finger quotes there. Bunkers to store mothballed tech, as it was replaced with newer equipment from the Terran government. An office of the hegemony's Central Intelligence Division, HCID, was established on New Dallas, but moved off planet after a few decades. Their memory core did not, however, but remained integrated into the HCID's computer network, ensuring that it had updates at every opportunity. By 2570, the bunkers had been sealed and remained locked down and undisturbed, with added protection added during the Operation Apotheosis, when the RimWorld troops failed to secure New Dallas's HBG network, then enacted a Scorch Earth policy, destroying the HBG and all infrastructure within reach. This collapsed a section of the city onto the entrance of the Boneyard bunkers, further obscuring and hiding them. It remained undisturbed for 3 centuries because of this. Then Uncle Chandy sent the Devil's Brigade in 3068 to investigate possible artifacts. When the Word of Blake learned of this, they dispatched a force to oppose the Devil's Brigade. After a back-and-forth campaign, the Devil's Brigade discovered the entrance to the bunker and were able to explore and recover the memory core when the Word of Blake forces were pushed back from the battlefield. They escaped with the memory core, but were forced to leave the physical salvage of all the hardware when they escaped off planet.
Yeah, I mean, Terran hegemony memory cores are interesting because the way they're described, you'd think that they would kind of have all the same information on all of them, but they seem to have gaps that other memory cores kind of fill in.
Theoretically, when the network is completely up and running, the memory core would be effectively the backup or would pull information from, say, the agricultural memory core that is stored in, the agricultural college on continent, whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just remember reading the Grey Death Legion book where they find the Helm memory core, and the way I remember it being described kind of gave you the sense that all the knowledge that the Terran hegemony had ever acquired was packed away into these things.
Yeah, it was the sum knowledge of all of humankind.
I mean, the more memory cores that are found, the more we find that's not the case. But given how much knowledge is in there, when you find it, it might as well be the sum knowledge of the Terran hegemony because there's just so much to go through.
Absolutely. And on top of that, the Grey Death Legion found one of the first memory cores. So back then, from their perspective, it would have been all of the knowledge.
Yeah.
Our sources for today are Sarna, Battletech Battlemech Manual, Master Unit List, TRO Primitives Volume 2, Succession Wars TRO and RS 3075 Age of War Unabridged, 3075 TRO, and Historical Turning Points New Dallas. Any others?
Nope. I just used 3075 this time, so...
We are supported by our Patreons at patreon.com/on the Origin of Battlemechs. Our social media on Twitter is at Origin of Mechs. We also have a dedicated channel on the Everything Battletech Discord. Feel free to stop by and say hi. If you have any questions, requests for topics, or wish to contact us, our email is ontheoriginofbattlemechs@gmail.com. If you enjoy the show, I encourage you to let your friends know about us and to leave a review. Special thanks to my friend Laura for the intro and outro. Class dismissed. Everybody have a great day.
Peace out, Mech Warriors.
Module complete. System standby. Would you like to load the next module?
Chandrasekhar?
Chandrasekhar.
Okay.
You could just say Uncle Chandy. That's his nickname.